Silverwolf is the immersion break you've been trying to avoid throughout all of your years of gaming. Because, wait a second, if this game is Honkai Star Rail and she's playing Honkai Impact 3rd and we play Honkai Impact 3rd, doesn't that just mean the Astral Express exists in real life? Maybe your dreams of Kafka aren't so far away after all. Anyways, here's my Silverwolf guide. This character is Honkai Star Rail's best debuffer, and I'm going to explain why and what her best builds are. If you enjoy these types of videos, make sure to leave a like down below, and with all of that being said, my name is Braxophone, and let's talk about Silverwolf. Yo, what's up? So I just recorded the kit section, and this is like the longest shit I've ever recorded in my entire life. But it's longer because she does so many things with her kit, and it's actually pretty important for you to understand how it works, so that way you can build teams better and build her better overall. So basically, if you care about that, watch this section. If you just want to know what stats to put on, there's timestamps in the description. You can do whatever you need. Silverwolf's kit is wordy enough that even she, like most gamers, probably never bothered to read it. So to save you the trouble of having to eventually Google everything, let's go over it. Running Online is all about debuffing enemies, lowering their defense and resistances, and applying weaknesses to them. She's effectively Star Rail Kazuha. She doesn't increase your damage percent, but she's universally good across tons of teams and makes enemies take a ton more damage, which enables basically any character on your team to deal a fair bit more damage when it's their turn. Now here's what makes Silverwolf completely unique and unlike any other character in the game right now. Her skill deals damage and has a base chance to add a weakness to an enemy based on your team composition. It can be any type from an ally, so for example, if you have Silverwolf, Asta, Welt, and Bailu in your team, the enemy can get Quantum, Fire, Imaginary, or Lightning weakness. On top of that, she also adds a 20% resistance shred of the element to the enemy, just to be in line with the resistance shred of standard weaknesses. To explain it in a different way, think of enemies like a soup. Soup broth can have a bunch of flavors as a base and be combined with other ingredients to get a certain flavor. Let's say you have a vegetable base and you're cooking up a delicious, delectable Tide Pod soup. The Tide Pods are cooked with the soup, and thus the soup inherits the Tide Pod flavor, becoming a tasty Tide Pod soup. However, if you add the Tide Pods to the soup once it's already out of the pot and in your bowl, that delicious Tide Pod flavor won't blend in with the soup in the right way. If an enemy is weak to ice, they already have 20% less resistance to ice. However, if you add the ice weakness during the battle, the resistance isn't lost, like how the Tide Pod doesn't blend with the soup in your bowl. That's why Silverwolf shreds an additional 20%, because it's basically just putting that weakness in line with all of the other weaknesses that the enemy already has. By the way, for legal reasons, I have to say, don't eat Tide Pods, please. Please don't do that. The rule is, though, that if the enemy is already weak to something, Silverwolf will prioritize other weaknesses. Basically, though, what this means is that you can actually run Silverwolf against quantum weak enemies and force very specific weaknesses onto them. This applies to other elements too, but it's just a way to make her work even better. If enemies are weak to every element on your team, then Silverwolf's initial resistance shred won't take effect. There's another base chance to apply a separate resistance shred though, and that applies to all elements, which is solid for your entire team. This ability alone makes Silverwolf a character that you want to run in very curated teams, and we'll talk about those in a bit, but I wanted to quickly let you know that Silverwolf's weakness application is not weighted towards any element. If you run 3 Fire and Silverwolf, you have a 50-50 chance of the weakness being Fire or Quantum. With 3 different elements, it's a 33% chance of each, and with 4, it's a 25% chance of each. It took a lot of testing to figure this out, and technically we still don't know 100% without actually data mining the code for the character, but those were the results that I got from different scenarios. So at least at the moment, having 3 of the same element doesn't weigh it more towards that element than Quantum. And I know I've been talking about this skill for like a half hour, but lastly, you can only have one of Silverwolf's weaknesses on each enemy, so it's not worth trying to put multiple on one boss because it won't work. Her talent is another reason why she's so strong, because whenever she attacks, she has a base chance to apply a bug debuff that does one of 3 things. It reduces enemy attack, reduces enemy defense, or reduces enemy speed. You want defense the most. Speed reduction is helpful for making enemies take longer to move, but ultimately dealing higher damage with your team is the most impactful thing. Some people think this passive is bad because it's RNG, but it does trigger the base chance on every attack she does, and enemies can have one of each bug at a time, so it ends up being fairly strong. And lastly, Silverwolf's ultimate is called User Banned. Between that and the sword symbol she has on her basic attack, this character is basically a Minecraft server admin. It deals a decent amount of damage because of its high multiplier, and it has a base chance to decrease the target enemy's defense. This debuff lasts for 3 enemy turns, so take advantage of it with a speedy team. Silverwolf's traces also massively help her kit as well. One of her major traces turns her bug length from 3 into 4 turns, and also gives her a base chance to bug any enemy when their weakness is broken. Her trace Inject increases the duration of her weakness implant from 2 to 3 turns, and her last major trace makes it so that whenever you use her skill, if there are 3 or more debuffs already affecting the enemy, the skill decreases enemy resistances by an extra 3%. Ultimately, her traces that extend your ability duration let Silverwolf be a skill point positive character, which I'll talk about more in the team section. Why is this so long? Her technique deals toughness damage to every enemy regardless of their weakness, and enemies that are broken with it get the quantum break debuff, which is a great utility for starting harder fights. I think that's the last part of her kit, but I do have one more thing to say before we move on. So something that I want to quickly address is a pretty big misconception that a lot of people have about Silverwolf and how good she is. Her kit is single target, so a lot of people think that Pela is just a better defense shred unit, and while it's true that Pela debuffs a bunch of enemies at once, ultimately Star Rail is a bossing game. The hardest content in this game so far has been single target bosses, which is why Sela is dominating Jingyuan right now in terms of usability, since her single target damage is higher. There's more nuance to it than that, obviously, but ultimately it doesn't hurt Silverwolf too much to be single target at the moment, because not only is most endgame content just one big boss, but also the sheer amount of value that she brings from her weakness application and other debuffs makes her a solid pick even into content with more adds or 2 bosses whenever that happens. So ultimately, I guess what I'm saying is that her being single target just doesn't really matter that much. Silverwolf is a top tier supporting unit, and you're gonna love using her in late game if you got her. For trace priority, I would level her skill, ultimate, and talent, but you don't have to worry about her basic until you get to really high investment. If you got this far, congrats on your new bachelor's degree. Now let's work on turning that into a master's degree. Next up is the light cone section, and I'm gonna tell you about all of her best light cones and rank them because they actually play into her build a fair bit. Silverwolf actually deals a decent amount of damage for a primarily support unit. It may be hard to believe, but this character debuffs enemies more than college debuffed my mental health. But realistically, you don't really want to go with the highest damaging light cone all the time, because Silverwolf's kit needs effect hit rate to get value. Getting her debuffs to hit most of the time is going to result in more overall team damage than if you can't get her debuffs to hit at all, but still build her for personal damage. So basically, her debuffs are more important than her personal damage. But with that said, her best damaging cone that's honestly just super solid overall is going to be her signature Incessant Rain, because it has high stats, it gives effect hit rate and crit rate, and it also debuffs enemies for 12% damage bonus, which is honestly just ridiculous effects for a Nihility character. Though it does require 3 debuffs on an enemy to activate, between the break effects that you're going to land and all of Silverwolf's debuffs, it's never really going to be an issue. If you don't decide to go for her signature though, the new free-to-play light cone before the tutorial mission starts is actually insane, and honestly makes her pretty free-to-play accessible. At S5, you're going to get 40% effect hit rate, which massively helps her hit all of her debuffs in harder content, and also gives back energy whenever you're attacking defense reduced enemies. Honestly, at Eidolon 0, this light cone could even be argued to be better than her signature, just because of how it helps her get her ultimate faster, and it has higher effect hit rate. You might see in longer fights that just because of her consistency hitting debuffs and getting energy back, it just feels easier to use. That said, like realistically on paper her signature is better, but this one is really good. I would say that getting her signature light cone isn't super necessary as a free-to-play player just because of how good this one is. But with that said, her signature is still really good, and it can let you use this free-to-play one on another Nihility character like Walter Pela, so spend your jades however you want. Outside of that, In the Name of the World is fantastic for the damage, attack percent, and effect hit rate on skill, but keep in mind that it only applies to her skill, and you may be lacking the effect hit rate on the rest of her kit, which comes from talent and ultimate as well. Now, if you ended up missing the free event light cone, but you do have Eyes of the Prey, this one can be really solid just because it gives you so much effect hit rate, and Resolution Shines as Pearls of Sweat is always good for the defense shred it can give. Here's weapon rankings based on personal damage by Silverwolf. Keep in mind that what I recommend though is a little different from this chart, because though Silverwolf can do solid damage if you build her for it, hitting her debuffs consistently is way more important to your team's overall damage, especially in late game when enemies have up to 40% or more effect resistance. But as you can see, if you're not doing super late game stuff, other light cones like Good Night and Sleep Well and the 3-star loop can be solid options for her personal damage. Ultimately, if you're unsure, I'd say give her the free-to-play light cone from this patch, just because it gives so much value for free, but in the end your build is up to you. Now, the reason I showcased light cones first is because her relics actually change based on what light cone you use, or if you have Eidolons, so let's talk about those next. For Silverwolf's relics, don't worry about farming anything until at least tier 40 in my opinion, since that's when you're guaranteed 1 5-star drop per run. If you're that early, you can just stack attack percent on your relics with maybe speed boots and quantum sphere, but when you're high enough trailblaze level to farm, I recommend going with the 4-piece quantum set or 4-piece wild wheat. 4-piece wild wheat can help you get an extra attack in some scenarios because of the speed buff it gives, and though that extra attack will be a basic attack and deal a little bit less damage than your skill, it will help you get an extra skill point back, and also it'll generate some more energy for Silverwolf. Also, since most of Silverwolf's attacks are basic attacks once you're in the boss phase, that basic attack damage bonus and attack percent stat can help her personal damage. Technically speaking though, the 4-piece Genius of Brilliant Stars set is higher damage overall, because let's be honest, defense ignore is stupid strong and it gives quantum damage bonus. Because Silverwolf can apply weaknesses, there's a lot of times where you'll get the full 20% defense ignore, which makes it a super strong set option. Here's a comparison of both of the sets. Honestly, I would just use the one with the best substats, and it's worth noting that if we ever get a relic set with effect hit rate or 2-piece speed on it, that'll probably take over as her best set, but for now, these are going to be your best options for relics. For planar sets, you basically always want Pan-Galactic Commercial Enterprise because it gives attack based on effect hit rate, which Silverwolf needs a lot of. You can also go Fleet of the Ageless for attack on your whole team, but I highly recommend Pan-Galactic. Silverwolf is a character that needs to hit her debuffs or she's dead weight in your team. Effect hit rate isn't as important with someone like Welt because he has so many chances to apply slow with his skill that if you're using him in early game, odds are you're gonna hit the debuff no matter what. This can change in late game of course due to enemy effect resistance, but the point is that Welt isn't a character that's immediately useless if his debuff doesn't activate immediately, whereas Silverwolf's entire kit revolves around it and she becomes dead weight if she doesn't hit her debuffs. On top of that, she's a support that wants to get her ultimate fast, and her personal damage isn't too bad. So after calculations, the best build for Silverwolf at Eidolon 0 is either an effect hit rate or an attack or crit body, depending on if you have effect hit rate on your light cone or not, speed or attack percent boots, quantum damage sphere, and an energy regen or attack percent rope. Boss effect resistance was nerfed in this patch, which means that you won't actually need as much effect hit rate as you might think, because previously bosses would have around 45% resistance, and you would need just over 100% effect hit rate on Silverwolf just to be able to always hit your debuff at trace level 8. Since they have reduced it, her effect hit rate needs are a little bit lower, and you can get away with a lot less. For endgame content and the highest level content, you're gonna need at least 80% effect hit rate, but I'd recommend around 85 to be able to get your skill down 90% of the time or so. If you want to be extra safe, you can go for around 100. But that said, for most content in the game that's not the highest end, you can go for around 60% effect hit rate, and that'll be pretty safe. Keep in mind, 40% of this can be covered by the light cone that you're getting for free this patch. So if you can manage to get around 80 to 85% effect hit rate for the hardest content, you'll be safe, and you can go for a little bit less than that if you're not doing all the Memory of Chaos stuff. You should be able to get to around that much without having to invest in a body piece if you get a lot of effect hit rate substats. So with that said, attack, crit body, or effect hit rate body can be good. You can make an argument for speed or attack boots. I've personally found in testing that speed boots help with getting your ultimate faster and generating more skill points for your more skill point heavy teammate. Now, as far as energy regen rope, there are two circumstances where you don't want to use it. And those are if you're using before the tutorial mission starts or if you have Eidolon 1. In these cases, you can go attack percent rope or even break effect if you want, since you'll have extra energy coming back to you on a regular basis. At E2, you can go for a crit body piece instead of effect hit rate and turn her into a fully fledged DPS with debuffs. We'll talk about Eidolons in depth in the last section if you want more details, but for now, just know that at E0, without her signature light cone, you want to run effect hit rate to deal with the highest boss effect resistances in the game. Then speed or attack boots, quantum damage sphere, and energy regen or attack percent rope. For substats, you definitely want to prioritize speed, crit, and attack percent. If you aren't using effect hit rate chest or weapon, then prioritize effect hit rate over anything else, but if you are using an effect hit rate weapon and the chest piece, odds are you won't need a lot of effect hit rate subs. Now, just in case you're wondering what I'm using effect hit rate, speed boots, quantum damage sphere, and energy regen. I am still farming that 4th piece for the quantum set, but I'm also getting Silo pieces, so I don't really mind too much. That was a lot of information, but I hope it helped you figure out how to build Silverwolf. Next up, I want to talk about our teams. So there's a lot of misconceptions floating around about Silverwolf and how free-to-play friendly she is. A lot of people are saying she's not a free-to-play friendly character. A lot of people are saying she's incredibly restrictive and she can't be used in a lot of teams. And that's honestly just not true at all. This is probably one of the most flexible characters in the game, probably one of the most free-to-play friendly characters in the game, especially now that we're getting that free-to-play light cone for her with the effect hit rate and the energy back. So overall, she's an amazing pull value unit, and I'm going to show you how she can be used in different teams and talk about where she is sort of best. So something that you should know right off the bat is that you want teams that are fast with Silverwolf. The thing is that she debuffs enemies, and she also applies weakness to enemies. By doing both of these things, you're going to be breaking enemies quickly and more frequently because you will have more weaknesses available to you, or more weakness break available to you. I think I said that right. And because you have more available to you, that means you're studying the enemy more. But also, if you play with faster characters, you're effectively getting more value out of your debuffs. For example, if you debuff enemies with Pela and Silverwolf, if you lower their defense, that defense debuff timer is only ticking when the enemy takes a turn. So if you slow down the enemy, if you freeze the enemy, if you break the enemy, and delay their action, that basically means that they're not actually getting rid of the debuff as quickly as your characters might be taking turns. And for that reason, having faster characters against enemies that are getting debuffed for defense shred is going to be more effective than just having characters that are really slow and bruisers, because if the enemy gets to move more, then you actually get less value. But with that said, even if the enemies are super fast, you're still getting a lot of value out of Silverwolf. But as far as team comps themselves go, I've seen a lot of people talking about how you have to run 3 of one element with her because that will give you a higher chance of getting that element and basically let you just farm break. And this is actually not entirely true, because as mentioned in the kit section, it seems to be a 50-50 split if you have 2 different elements. If you have 3 different elements, it seems to be 33%. If you have 4 different elements, it seems to be 25% each way. So as an example, if you run these 3 fire characters, you have a 50% chance of getting fire weakness and a 50% chance of getting quantum weakness. That means that basically, if you wanted to run 2 quantum characters and 2 fire characters, you totally could. I had Himiko here just as an example for the Himiko players that have been waiting for a way to play Himiko since release. This is a really good one because you're going to get a lot of value out of break between Asta, Fireblazer, and Himiko herself, and then she's going to activate her town a lot. So for you Himiko enjoyers, this is a good one for you. And realistically, if you want more damage, Hook is probably a better pick here, but I haven't actually simmed this team. I've just kind of tested it and it felt pretty good to play. But anyways, where I was going with that is you could actually run Scylla and Silverwolf and Asta and Trailblazer. And between this team, I mean, granted, you're not going to have a lot of healing, right? So this probably isn't the optimal team, but just as an example, using 2 quantum and 2 fire is effectively the same thing as using 3 fire and 1 quantum, right? So by using Scylla with Silverwolf, because you have that 50-50, regardless of how many fire and how many quantum you have, you're actually getting a lot of break value out of Scylla, Silverwolf, Asta, and Trailblazer together because you can run 2-2. And also, technically speaking, if we got another quantum character, if we got like another quantum support, for example, let's say that Bailu is a new quantum abundance character, then you still have that 50-50, but you have Asta who has a bounce skill. So if you do manage to hit the 50-50 and hit fire, Asta's still getting a ton of value with her break. And that's another thing too, is that when you're playing with Silverwolf characters that break a lot or that want to run break effect for their maximum amount of damage, get more value just because not only are they hitting enemies that have debuffs where their defense is down, but also because you can apply that weakness, your break characters get a lot more value. So in this case, running 1 fire and 3 quantum would also be okay if we had a 3rd quantum that worked with this team specifically. Unfortunately, QQ, I would not run her with Scylla and Silverwolf. I would run one or the other. But as for some other team ideas, I personally like the idea of a mono imaginary team. And now this won't be possible until the second half of the patch when you get Locha and when you also get Yukong. But between Locha and Yukong, you can actually run the Asta Light Cone on Yukong, which will give your entire team an imaginary damage bonus. Welt is actually a really solid damage dealer and debuffer. And with their defense being shred, with Yukong's attack buff and crit buffs, Welt will be able to deal a ton of personal damage. And then between all of the break that you have bounce skill on Welt, which is going to break a lot. You're going to have Locha, who's going to be basic attacking basically every time, and he also scales an attack, so his personal damage isn't too bad. This team seems like it's going to be actually really absurd for crowd control and the amount of damage that it's going to be able to output while not really taking much. So I think a mono imaginary team is going to be really good. And again, if we get a quantum abundance, you could run that instead of Locha too, just as an example. Now, another team that I haven't seen a lot of people talk about, maybe it's just because everyone's like converting to Jinguan Hate Club, which is really sad because I personally like him a lot, and I'm sure there's a lot of you guys that do too. But Jinguan does a lot of AoE damage, and Bailu's going to be using her basic attack a lot. Tingyun's going to be using her basic attack a lot. You could use the Asta Light Cone here for more lightning damage. You're going to be able to break a lot of lightning toughness, and that's going to be really valuable across this entire team. And Silverwolf has a 50-50 of hitting quantum or lightning. So there you go. You may have to use her skill more than once, but you know, you can just reset if you have to. So now one that I am really proud of and that I think is going to be a really like absurdly good, is a Susong team with Clara and Natasha, a mono fizz, if you will. Now, like I said, if you get a quantum abundance, quantum preservation, that could work out fairly well. But Clara wants to get punched. Well, I mean, she probably doesn't want to get punched, but, you know, to max out her damage, she needs to get hit, right? So she gets hit, and then Svarog punches or lasers the enemy back, and you deal a lot of physical damage. But if you apply physical weakness to them, Natasha basics are going to break, Clara counters are going to break, Clara basic and skill's going to break, Susong is going to break with her skill, and when Susong gets break, she gets more value than most other characters, just due to how her kit works. Let me show you. If enemies have their weakness broken whenever you hit them with their skill, you trigger Sword Stance, which deals a ton of extra damage. But on top of that, you also have this bonus ability, which is basically going to move her action forward if an enemy on the field has their weakness broken, not necessarily even by Susong, just if an enemy on the field has weakness break like on them. It doesn't even have to be her, right? After basic or skill, action forward. It also applies to her talent. When an enemy has their weakness broken on field, she gets a speed increase as well. So Susong gets a massive damage increase across the board if enemies have their weakness broken. And this setup is definitely going to be one of her strongest teams, if not her strongest, because between the damage that both Clara and Susong can bring and the amount of damage increased that Susong is getting based on all the debuffs that Silverwolf's going to be applying, plus all of the weakness break you're going to have, and because physical bleed is so powerful, Susong gets a lot of value here, and this team is going to be one of the better teams for sure. And lastly, this mono ice team is also going to be ridiculous. Now, obviously, Japard is just there to keep everyone alive, but between Pela and Silverwolf, the amount of defense you can shred on the enemies is absurdly high. If you're able to shred a ton of enemy defense, that means that you can basically just get free damage. Pela and Silverwolf are both going to deal okay personal damage because the enemies are going to have such low defense to begin with that it's not going to really matter that much. Yanqing is already an absurdly good damage dealer, and he attacks fast and frequently, so he's going to get lots of attacks before the enemy's debuffs actually disappear. But on top of that, with Silverwolf and Pela, you should be able to keep your ult uptime pretty solid, especially with all of the freeze that you're going to be getting because of the ice weakness you're going to implant. And overall, the ice focused team with Silverwolf is going to be super solid. And if you don't have Yanqing, but you do have Pela and Japard, I recommend putting Sela here if you have her, because again, you can just run 50-50 with ice and quantum, and you know, you'll be able to break plenty while still dealing really high damage. Now, one last thing that I wanted to mention that I think is really, really important to just playing Silverwolf in general is that if you're up against enemies that already have quantum on them, if they're already weak to quantum, then she gets even more value because she's not going to be able to place the same weakness on an enemy that they already have. So if enemies are already weak to quantum, but they don't have physical, you're basically guaranteeing a 100% chance to land physical weakness. This means effectively Silverwolf is best in content that actually already has a quantum weakness, but she's still amazing in content that doesn't have a quantum weakness. And that makes her an incredibly flexible character that you can use in most teams. You can honestly just throw her in with like any other elements and she would still be pretty dang good just by the pure value in debuffs and break that she adds. So overall, very free to play friendly unit and very flexible unit. And she's this game's Cosmo. Like there's nothing else to say about it. So anyways, let's talk about Eidolons next, and I'll catch you in a minute. So in all of our Star Rail experience so far, I don't think we've ever had, oh my God, that voice crack. Bro, I'm 25. Why is this happening to me? I don't think we've ever had Eidolons as game breaking as Silverwolf. So there's one in particular that I want to talk about, but we'll go through all of them just so you know what they do and which ones are the best value. And also we'll talk about whether or not you should pick up her signature light cone versus just getting Eidolons. First, her Eidolon 1 makes it so that after she uses her ultimate, she regenerates 7 energy for every debuff that the targeted enemy has, and this can be triggered up to 5 times in each use of her ultimate, which basically means that if the enemy has 5 debuffs on them, then you are getting 35 energy back just for ulting, plus the 5 energy you would normally get back for your ult, so a total of 40 energy after you ult, which basically makes it so that she has no energy issues at all. You don't have to run an energy regen rope on her, and she's going to get her ultimate back and have that uptime very frequently. The thing is, you don't really need Silverwolf's ultimate every other turn. You're going to basically have it up for 3 turns at a time, and this is 3 enemy turns. So if you're slowing the enemy or debuffing the enemy or breaking the enemy, it's going to set them back and it's going to make your debuffs last longer, which means that effectively all this does is make it so you can build Silverwolf for a bit more damage, but it's pretty dang good overall. Her Eidolon 2 though is probably the best Eidolon in the entire game at the moment, and let me explain why, because this is actually ridiculous. When an enemy enters battle, reduce their effect resistance by 20%. That might not seem like a lot. That might just seem like, oh yeah, you know, 20% effect resistance down, cool, I can hit my effects more. I don't think you understand the gravity of the situation here. When an enemy enters battle, reduce reducing their effect resistance by 20% is huge. It's going to affect your entire team. This is not effect resistance against Silverwolf, this is effect resistance in general. And to put into perspective how much effect resistance enemies have, right now on the higher end, you're maybe looking at 45% for the hardest bosses in the entire game. So you're taking almost half of that away and making it so that you don't have to build nearly as much effect hit rate on Silverwolf to be able to hit your effects, but she also is reducing the needs for effect hit rate on all of your other characters on your team as well. This means characters like Walt, Pela, any character with a base chance for an effect to happen against an opponent is getting instantly a ton more value and may not need to build effect hit rate at all in some cases. In Silverwolf's case specifically, you can actually do away with the effect hit rate body, and you can give her something like a crit rate or a crit damage body or an attack body to make her deal a lot more personal damage. And between this one and E1, Silverwolf becomes a really high damaging support character. Her damage increases by a pretty significant amount when you actually build her for DPS, and E1 and E2 are going to make it so she's a lot better at that. E2 in general, I think, is actually the best value Eidolon in the entire game, and I'm not going to tell you to go for it because I think that going for Eidolons on characters is generally a scam, but if you're a light spender or if you were looking forward to E6ing this character maybe, you'll be glad to know how insanely powerful E2 is. E3 is going to increase your skill and talent level, which is basically going to increase your chances to land debuffs as well, so this can be even more helpful and make you need even less effect hit rate and also make you do a bit more damage. And her E4 is also a pretty significant jump. After using her ultimate to attack enemies, deals additional quantum damage equal to 20% of Silverwolf's attack for every debuff currently on the enemy target, and this can be triggered for a max of 5 times during each use of her ultimate. Now, I personally haven't gotten to test if this affects toughness bars, but if it does, that's absolutely insane. All you need is 5 debuffs to max this out, and honestly, in this game, getting 5 debuffs on enemies isn't actually as hard as it might look, especially seeing as damage over time effects do count as debuffs. Once we're able to actually test this, I will pin a comment that says if it affects a break effect, but until then, stay tuned. Right now, it does look really good. E5 is going to level up your ultimate and your basic attack, and the basic attack isn't huge, but it is going to be a big portion of our damage since you're going to be using it so many times. And E6 is actually insane. So basically, for every single debuff that the target enemy has, the damage dealt by Silverwolf is going to increase by 20% up to a limit of 100%. This basically means that for every debuff, you're getting 20% damage bonus on Silverwolf, and it makes her damage ridiculous. Between all of the Eidolons that have basically let you shift her from a support build over to a damage build, and on top of the damage increase she's getting from her talent level ups as well, and because of her bounce attack also dealing more damage, her E6 is actually ridiculous. Getting 5 debuffs on enemies is not difficult, and 100% total damage bonus on Silverwolf is going to make this character an off-the-charts damage dealer that's also an insane support character. I cannot stress this enough that Eidolons on Silverwolf are actually insane. Now, this character is really good without Eidolons. You don't actually need E1 or E2, E3. You don't need any of the Eidolons for this character. But I will say that this character's value that she gets from E1 and E2 is ridiculous. For that reason, I'm going to recommend Eidolon 1 first. Eidolon 1 makes it so that you effectively never have to run energy regen rope again. It's going to increase all of your light cone damage outputs, except for the free-to-play one because you're going to be running attack rope with that one anyways, and effectively increase Silverwolf's personal damage by a pretty significant amount. I mean, you can look here if you don't believe me. Here's an Eidolon 0 comparison to Eidolon 1. The difference is pretty significant. Now, keep in mind though that you still want effect hit rate if you're only at E1 and you're not at E2. So a lot of these light cones that you could use because you no longer have the energy issues still won't be 100% optimal all the time. You may still end up missing debuffs on some of the harder content, so that's worth keeping in mind. Which is why after Eidolon 1, I recommend getting her light cone if you don't already have it. Though E2 is, like I said, probably the best Eidolon in the game, if you want the best Silverwolf that you can possibly get, the damage difference is pretty dang significant, and that light cone also has effect hit rate on it, so you're not really losing much in her kit if you upgrade to that light cone, and you are gaining a lot of personal damage. On top of that, the light cone can be used on other Nihility characters, so if you're planning on getting other Nihility in the future, or if you just use other Nihility characters, it can be a really good pickup. Now with that said, if you just want the best overall value for your account, but you don't play a lot of Nihility characters, E2 is going to be a little bit better, so it's kind of up to you, but in my personal opinion, I argue E1, then S1 of her light cone, and then E2. That said, you might disagree. I mean, everything in this game is nuanced and imperfect anyways, and for your account, the situation may be different, so take everything with a grain of salt. Remember, while it's optimal to spend for Eidolon 2 and S1 of her light cone, the optimal amount of money to spend on gacha games in general is $0, because they're free, and you should enjoy them free if you can. But this is mostly just advice for people that are deciding to spend just because you like the character, whatever. Honestly, I don't know. I don't police your money. But anyway, Silverwolf is an amazing character at Eidolon 0, and even without her signature weapon, and honestly, I can't believe they released her in the state she is in, because she really does feel like Honkai Star Star Rail's Kazuha. She's very powerful, and though she does have some RNG aspects to her, she's still one of the strongest supports in the entire game, and honestly, I'd put her in Bronya tier, which is funny because she's also Bronya. Anyways, I hope you guys found this video helpful. This character's really much more free-to-play friendly than other people are saying she is, and honestly, she's probably one of the least restrictive characters in the entire game in terms of team comp, and anyone who's saying that you have to have a certain amount of 5 stars for her, or you have to have her signature light cone, are just, I mean, honestly, they're just wrong. Like, there's no way around it. She's a really free-to-play friendly character and a very powerful support. So that said, of course, as you spend more money, she gets better, and that's the case with gacha games all around. As a heads up, I go live a few days a week on Twitch at twitch.tv/Braxophone, so if you want to see where all of this testing and stuff happens, or if you just want to come hang out, feel free. If you've enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe down below, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Stay tuned for more videos like this, and yeah, see ya.